Those magnificent buggers from Modelling for Advantage have once again sent me a sprue to review. This time it's the 15mm M24 Chaffee kit from Battlefront. This is a tiny kit of an important US vehicle which arrived quite late in the war, but they did see action in the Battle of the Bulge in December and served with the forces of several nations in the battles in 1945. Join me for a look at the plastic M24 Chaffee from Battlefront. This is UBX94, the M24 Chaffee tank platoon box set for Flames of War. This 15mm plastic kit was released as part of the Bulge American late war releases. It comes as a 5-vehicle platoon box and is also one of the tanks in the very good value Spearhead US starter box. The Chaffee is a light tank designed for the reconnaissance role. The earlier M3 and M5 Stuart light tanks had performed well, but it was recognised that the 37mm gun was no longer really powerful enough by 1943. The Chaffee mounted a lightweight 75mm gun, derived from the armament of the B-25H Mitchell bomber. Performance was comparable to the short M3 75mm gun on the Sherman, but it had a lighter, thin-walled barrel. The power plant and transmission was taken directly from the M5 Stuart. Tracks were narrow at just 16 inches. The suspension system used torsion bars and large road wheels, similar to the M18 Hellcat tank destroyer. This system gave a smoother ride than the volute suspension used by most previous US tank designs. The armour was quite thin, from 1.5 inches down to under half an inch. These tanks were designed for reconnaissance, using cover, speed and mobility to avoid being hit. The 75mm gun gave the Chaffee a punch if it needed it, but that was secondary. Crew was 5 men: commander, gunner, loader, driver and assistant driver. The drivers were in the hull while the commander, gunner and loader were in the turret. Apparently manpower shortages often meant Chaffee operated with a crew of only 4 men. The assistant driver would crawl back into the loader's position in the turret if the tank saw action. The first pilot vehicle was ready in October 1943, with manufacturers Cadillac and Massey Harris starting production in 1944. 34 M24s reached Europe in November 1944, and they saw action on the southern sector of the Battle of the Bulge in December. Deliveries ramped up and Chaffee went on to see widespread service in Germany in 1945. However, deployment of the new type was slow. Some armoured divisions ended the war still using Stuarts in their light tank companies. Britain also used Chafees to replace some Stuarts in 1945, eventually receiving several hundred via Lend-Lease. The reaction to Chaffee was generally positive. While the light armour was vulnerable to tanks, guns and infantry anti-tank weapons, the new tank had good mobility and was reliable. Crews also appreciated the increased firepower of the bigger 75mm gun. While too late to make a big contribution in Europe, the M24 served post-war in Korea and Vietnam. It was also exported to 28 countries, and the chassis served as the basis for a number of other vehicles. If we look at the back of the box, we can see an image of the completed kit and an exploded assembly diagram. Parts count is low and the assembly looks pretty straightforward. The open and closed commander's hatch is the only real option here. This box set contains 5 tanks and a decal sheet. There's also a sprue of hard plastic commander figures. As is now standard but disappointing practice, Battlefront no longer include unit cards in the box. The Restless Kaiser and I disagree about this. He prefers Battlefront to include decals in the boxes and buy card packs or get cards from starter sets. However, my viewpoint is not having the unit cards means the box set is incomplete as a game resource. You can play without decals, but you can't really play without cards. Another purchase is required to get these on the table for Flames of War. The issue of decals or unit cards remains a gentleman's disagreement between myself and the Kaiser. What you need to take away from this is that you'll need to buy a separate Bulge American unit card pack in order to field your already pricey box of Chaffees. Let's look at the plastic. The Chaffee comes on 2 sprues of olive green plastic. Parts count is low and this looks like an easy kit to build. Parts are mostly clean and well moulded, with a sharpness and level of detail you would expect from a modern Battlefront plastic kit. This first sprue has the upper and lower turret pieces and the sand shields, as well as the upper and rear hull. The upper hull has some nice engine grills and fuel filler caps, as well as large hatches for the driver and bow gunner. The 30 caliber hull machine gun is moulded integral with the hull piece. This simplifies assembly but does result in some excess plastic under the gun barrel. It shouldn't show up on the completed kit, but it should be easy to undercut and remove if it bugs you. The hull rear has some convoy lights, but other than that it's pretty simple. The upper turret has a separate commander's hatch so it can be modelled open or closed. The loader's hatch is moulded closed. There's quite a bit of line detail for the armour casting of the turret, which helps add some depth here. However, I did find some fine pitting on some of the surfaces. This looks like a moulding defect. Not major, but it does noticeably mark the smooth surface. The lower turret piece is pretty simple. The last pieces on this sprue are the two side skirts. Tanks were initially issued with these, but they fairly quickly tore off in use. It's up to you if you decide to fit these on your kit or not. Even images of Chaffees in British service overwhelmingly show the tank without skirts. This second sprue has the lower hull, one-piece tracks and detail parts like the mantlet, hatch options and the main gun. The track guards are moulded integral with the lower hull. The upper hull sandwiches down on this to model the outward sloped hull plates that are a major feature of the M24's armour design. Tracks are one-piece parts. It looks like there's plenty of room around the parts for a semi-slide mould to put detail onto the tracks. Despite this, the detail is pretty indistinct, just a few triangle shapes that only run around the top of the track run. I'm guessing this is meant to be the T72E1 single-pin steel track rather than the rubber chevron T85, but it's a bit hard to tell. The large road wheels of the torsion bar suspension are shown with some nice bolt detail. This looks great. Unfortunately, on my example there are some sink marks. I checked this on the Chaffee sprues from the spearhead box I bought and they were all fine. Along with the surface pitting I mentioned earlier, this is a quality control issue to watch out for. The 50 caliber machine gun is mounted on a pintle welded on top of the turret aft of the loader's hatch. This was the standard placement during assembly but proved awkward to use. In service it was often relocated further forward in front of the commander's hatch. This is the M6 75mm gun barrel. You can see this lightweight gun is a bit smaller than the M3 gun on the Sherman. The end of the barrel part is keyed to match a D-shaped key on the mantlet piece. The other parts here are the open and closed commander's hatches and the turret peg. The commander's coupler has vision blocks and a single-piece hatch, similar to the late Sherman coupler. There is some very light flash around this part, so be sure to clean this up during assembly. The final few parts are the mantlet piece and a rear stowage rack for the hull. The mantlet casting is nice and thick to provide some measure of ballistic protection. Note the D-shaped socket in this piece to help locate and position the main gun. There are a couple of pieces of stowage here, a bedroll and some satchels. These are always useful for individualising tanks in your force. So those are the parts for the 15mm M24 Chaffee from Battlefront. This is a simple kit with few parts or options, but looks like it will build up quickly into a great kit. Detail is generally strong and well moulded. During assembly I found that I needed to do some sanding to minimise gaps on the hull parts. The tolerances here are pretty tight. In the end it looked okay, but I wasn't able to completely eliminate the gaps on the front hull seam. This might need some filler. The track tread detail is a bit simplified. Not a deal breaker in a wargaming kit, but definitely a bit more Zvezda than typical Battlefront. There's also a little flash, again the work of mere moments to sort out. More concerning are the pits on the turret surfaces and sink marks on the track parts. I checked for sink marks on the Chaffee tracks from my spearhead box and they were all fine. Unfortunately, the surface pits were present on most of the Chaffee turrets. It is minor, but being on the turret makes it noticeable. If your kit has either of these issues, you can try to use side skirts or stowage to obscure the defect, or contact Battlefront for a replacement. Their customer service team are always very helpful with this stuff. Despite these issues, this is a nice kit, with Battlefront's usual good standard of engineering. But it does look like this run of kits has had an injection moulding or quality control issue. Let's look at using the Chaffee on the table. This is the card for the standard Chaffee tank platoon. Veteran M24s get a separate card. Tank unit is the only special rule noted on the unit card. Motivation is a confident 4+, but the blood and guts and protected ammo rules give a last stand and remount of 3+. Skill is a trained 4+. Again, this card doesn't represent a veteran formation, just trained citizen soldiers. They are aggressive, which means Chaffee's a hit on a 3+. Again, this number is one better for veterans. Armour is light with front armour 4, side and rear of 3 and top 1. These are light tanks and should attack from ambush or cover, not slog it out with medium tanks. Speed is also an advantage for the Chaffee. Tactical move is 12 inches or 30 centimetres, with a 14-inch tactical dash and up to a 28-inch road dash. This mobility should allow these light tanks to quickly reposition to a threatened flank or dash up to threaten an objective. The Chaffee's 75mm gun has a 28-inch or 70 centimetre range, with a moving and halted rate of fire of 2, anti-tank 10 and a 3+ firepower. Despite being lightweight, this gun gives Chaffee similar firepower to a 75mm armed Sherman. Plus the moving rate of fire of 2 means there's no reason these should be sitting still. Chaffee will reward aggressive play as long as you remember your lack of armour. The special rules include smoke and stabiliser. Weapons with the stabiliser special rule suffer a +1 penalty to hit if they moved in their movement step. This is the trade-off for a higher moving rate of fire. Even with gyro stabilisers, it's harder to hit targets accurately on the move. Chaffee started to replace the M3 and M5 Stuarts series of light tanks in US Armoured divisions from December 1944. If we check out the online forces builder, they're available in the M4 and Veteran M4 tank company lists. In these formations you can see both Chaffee and Stuarts listed as an optional light tank platoon replacement for one of the compulsory Sherman tank platoons. Chaffees work out about 3 points each for regular formations, or 4 points each for veterans. The Bulge lists also let you field the M24 as a standard or veteran Chaffee tank company. This formation gives you optional access to some M4 Sherman tanks as well. Integrated support choices include Sherman 105s or M8 Scott assault guns, as well as armoured 81mm mortars. Another interesting option is to field an M24 Chaffee cavalry tank company. Available via a command card, this Chaffee heavy formation gives you a HQ and up to 3 platoons of M24s. You also get up to 2 platoons of M8 Greyhound or M5 Stuart cavalry recon patrols. The final option on the card lets you add a veteran M8 Scott assault gun platoon of up to 6 vehicles at 2 points each. I don't usually even look at command cards, but this sounds like it might be a fun unit, as long as you throw in some support options with heavier AT. So that's the 15mm plastic M24 Chaffee kit from Battlefront. It's a small kit with a limited parts count but is well engineered and builds up into a solid wargaming tank. Despite the limited parts, detail is generally good and the finished product looks great. The surface texture and sink mark issues are unfortunate. Keep an eye out. Despite what appears to be a semi-slide mould, the track tread detail wasn't anything special, but I suspect few gamers lean in close and scrutinise a model's treads during play. The lack of unit cards in your platoon box sets continues to irk me, but that's the strategy Battlefront has chosen to take going forward. That sounds like a lot of complaints, but most of this is pretty minor. Let's just remember that this is a great little kit. It gives US forces a fast light tank with a bigger punch than Stuart. If you use their mobility and keep them out of range of enemy anti-tank fire, they should do great threatening objectives or turning a flank during play. Thanks again to Modelling for Advantage for generously supplying this review kit. Their support really helps this channel continuing to make content. You should totally check out the Kaiser and JonnyB's shenanigans on their channel. Link in the description below. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.